Hey guys, this is going to be part 9 in the Create a WhatsApp Web Clone with Appwrite and Vue.js. So let's jump right into things. The first thing we want to do is just a bit of housekeeping. Appwrite released a new major version for their npm package, so we're just going to want to install that. So npm uninstall the old version, Appwrite. And then we're just going to npm install it again. This will give us the latest version. It should be 10 point something at this point. This gives us all the helper functions when we work with permissions, which we're going to be working with extensively, as well as queries with the database, which we're also going to be working with once we get to the actual sending messages. So that's super cool. So we have Appwrite 10.1.0. There are going to be a few things that we're going to need to fix along the way, just because there are some breaking changes, but we'll knock those bugs out once we approach them. So if we look at where we're holding, we had the contact list we were about to create, and we also have a contact item. So let's start off with the contact list. And now the contact list, essentially, like we said, gets an array of contacts, and it needs to render out a list of contact items. So we're going to say main class, and our main class is going, main element is going to have a class of divide y. That's just for a horizontal row in between each one. And then we're going to have the contact items, which we will auto import there. We'll just have a closing tag, and the contact item will be v for contact in contacts. Then we will pass through the contact, which is just a contact. And let's go to our contact item and define the props here as well. So we're going to define, well, actually, let's start with interface props. So we have a single contact, which is of type contact, and define the props. Cool. Aside from that, we're going to actually need to create the UI over here. So let's just do that really quickly. So the first thing we're going to do is going to have the container. So it is going to be a flex container with the items centered vertically, items center. We're going to have padding on the x-axis of 2. When I hover, we want a background of gray, 100, a padding y of 4, cursor pointer, and relative positioned. Cool. We're just going to make a simple avatar. At some point we'll go ahead and actually create the pictures in the avatars, but we'll probably leave that for later on, since it's not really critical to the core functionality of WhatsApp. So div class and flex column, and then margin left of 3. And inside here we're just going to have a div with the contact.email. And this is our contact item. Back in our contact list, we're going to say, okay, so for each one of these we pass through the contact, and let's just say that when I click one, so we're going to do something. So at click, and we just want to do something. So for now we'll just define emits, and emits is just a way of emitting an event in Vue, and we're just going to say selected. And we're going to handle this event in the parent component, basically the component that wraps the contact list. So we're just going to say emit selected, and we're just going to pass through the contact.email. And essentially, if we think about why we're actually doing this, so if we go to where we're using the contact list, so this is in our new group participants, and this is where we actually add participants to the sidebar. To the group. So we actually want to be able to add contacts to the group a lot easier, as opposed to typing in the email manually. So let's just handle that event right now. So when I click it and I get the selected event, so at selected, and we're just going to say on selected, and now we have to implement this function. So let's go to the bottom of the page here, and let's just say function on selected member, which is a string. So we're just going to say group store.add new group invitee, the member. And let's just clear out the email ref as well. Okay, cool. So I think that is hooked up properly. We have the contact list. We emit. Well, I don't want to emit it like this. So we're just going to say const emit and get rid of this $sign. It's not really so important, just a matter of personal preference. And here we emit that upwards. Okay, cool. So if we go to our page, I think we still have to do one more thing before we actually get started with this. If we go to our database and we go to the settings of our contacts collection, you'll see that we never actually ended up setting up the permissions properly. So we're just going to do enabled and update that. Alright, and before we actually even move on, remember we always want to keep our appwrite.json and our UI in sync. So we're just going to say appwrite init collection, and we're going to wait for it to pop up. Sometimes the first time around it takes a little while, so we want to sync the WhatsApp. Cool. And we got the context, and if we go to our appwrite.json file, you'll see that we now have in the collections, we now have the document security true. Oop. Okay, fine. And now that that is done, we're going to go back to our interface and go to here. We're going to create a new group. And you can see here that we have our contacts, and these are the members of the other groups that we're a part of that we've already created in test group, awesome people, and all these groups. So that is cool that that works. And let's just make sure that we can actually add these people, and you can see that when you click it, so it adds them, and when you can remove them as well. Cool. So let's actually just go with test@gmail.com. Let's go to the next step and just write test group 11, I don't know, and check mark. Now, okay, actually, never mind, it went pretty quickly. So sometimes you'll notice that when you click the check mark, it will take a little bit of time to actually go back to the main page, and that's because sometimes if an Appwrite function isn't up and running yet, so it'll take a few seconds, 2-3 seconds to actually boot it up, and that's called the cold start time, which is essentially the first time it gets up and running is it takes a little bit more time, but after that there'll be no delay, and once more people use this, so you won't even realize that there's a delay because it'll just keep using the same function. Alright, moving on. So now that we have the group creation flow working properly, let's actually work on the sending messages. Okay, fine. So let's just quickly do this over here. I'm just gonna move this off to the side so I have another screen over here. And let's go to our database, and we're gonna create the messages collection. Okay, so we go to the databases, we want to add a new collection called messages, and we don't want to auto-generate the ID. We want a consistent ID, and create. And once we're in here, we're going to say that we want the document security enabled. And another thing we're going to do is just write in any here and create. And essentially what this means is that any user is able to create a document in the messages field. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the permissions over here. But essentially, actually I'll save the explanation for when we get to that. But essentially it's basically saying any user is able to create any document in here. We also have the document security enabled, which is basically going to allow us to lock down specific documents. So for example, I want only myself to be able to edit a message. So we're going to be able to do that with document level security. For now, go to your attributes tab and let's create the attributes necessary for our messages. So the first thing we're going to need is a string attribute, which is going to be the message contents. We're going to have a pretty big size, let's just say 65,000. It's long enough and it's going to be required. Now let's go to another string attribute, and this is going to be group ID, and this is going to be the way we're going to refer between a group and its messages. We also want the user who created this message, or who sent this message, so it's going to be user ID, it's also required. And the final thing we're going to want is the email of the user who created this message. Something to note, we did this over here in the messages collection, as well as in the contacts collection, if I remember correctly. So we also have the email, and this is something we're going to have to keep in sync, because if a user changes their email, we want to make sure that we update the email in the contacts collection as well as the messages collection. So we go back to our attributes. I accidentally wrote that as a string, so I'm just going to delete it and recreate it because I want it to make it a type email. So add attribute, new email attribute, and this is going to be email, which is required, and create. Cool. The next thing we're going to need is the indexes tab, and since we're going to be asking for all the messages within a group, so we just really need to create a key index. We're just going to call this group based on the group ID and create that. And that will be all for the database structure for this. Cool. So if we go back to our code, the next thing we're going to start back to the UI, what we're going to want to do is when I click on one of these things, I want to be taken to the history for that group. So let's jump right into that. Now let's go to our code. Let's see how we're going to implement this. Okay, fine. So if we take a look at where our sidebar is, sidebar. So we know that we want to have the main view to the right of this sidebar. So let's actually just create the chat view, let's call it. Well, first let's create a chat view a component, chat view.view. And it's going to be a template, standard stuff, template. And we're going to have script, setup, lang equals ts. Cool. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to need a few more components. We're going to need the top bar, which is going to have the group's icon. We'll just put in a blank avatar for now. We're going to need the actual history, and we're going to need a chat input. So let's just sketch this out. We're going to have a main, which is going to have a class of h full and then width full. We're going to have a header component, which is going to have a class of width full. We're going to have a BG of gray 100. We're going to have a height, and this is going to be hard-coded at 55 pixels because that's what WhatsApp has, pretty much. It's going to be a flex container, items center, and padding x of 2. Inside this header, we're just going to have an avatar, and we're going to have the current group's name. So we're going to have a div class equals, we're going to offset it a little bit to the left, margin left of 5. And now we're going to need the group store. So let's just say const group store is equal to use group store. And if we look here, we haven't actually yet set it up, the thing that we need. We're going to need a way to store our current group. So if we go to the group store, and let's add another property to our state interface, and this is going to have the current group, and it's going to be optional, and it's going to say models.team. It's not an array, it's a single team. And I'm going to add a current group, and that will just start off as undefined. Now, back in our chat view, we're going to want to say that the name of the group is going to be equal to group store.currentGroup.name. And that way we have the current group. The next thing we're going to need is the chat history component. Let's just close the sidebar here. We're going to need the chat history.view. And this will have a template, as well as the script setup lang equals TS. In the chat history, we're going to need the messages, which we don't have just yet, but for now, let's just create the placeholder for it. We're going to create a main. This is going to have a class of width full. A height is going to be a calculated height, so calc of 100% minus 110 pixels. And the reason for 110 pixels is because we're going to have the top bar, the header, and the footer, which is the chat input, calculated. We want this to be a flex container, flex column for all the messages. We're going to have padding of 5, space y, which is just the distance between each of the messages, at 4. I'm going to say it's positioned relative. Let's stop that over here. We're going to just add the overflow y auto. The background is also going to go here soon, but let's just create our chat input. So new file, chat input.vue. And with our chat input, it's going to be a pretty simple component, template, and we're going to have our main. It's going to have a class of width full, height of 55 pixels, background gray of 100. It's going to be flex, items center, justify between, and a padding x of 5. It will have a input component. Well, first let's add the script setup here so that we can get the auto import. Script setup lang equals TS. And then we're going to have our input component that we created. It's going to be type is going to equal text. We're going to have a V model for message text. So let's just move this to the next row. Const message text is equal to a ref empty string, and V model to message text. We're going to want to have a class of width, probably 10-12, and then flex 1. Cool. We're going to have a placeholder that says type a message, and we're going to add in a send button as well. So the send button will have a class of flex. This is the container of the send button actually. It's going to have flex, items center, height full, and margin left of 4. And inside here we're going to have our paper airplane icon. Let's just import that paper airplane icon from the solid variety. And we're just going to have our paper, just copy that in here. And it's going to have a class of height of 6, a width of 6, and cursor pointer. Okay, so back in our chat view, we just need to import our components. So underneath the header, we're going to have our chat history, and underneath our chat history, we're going to have our chat input. And let's just make that cool. Now inside our application component, we're going to import our chat view component, chat view, but we'll only import the chat view, meaning we'll only show it if there is a current group. Group store dot current group. Okay, so I'm gonna have to import that. So const group store is equal to use group store. Cool. I'm not sure why there's a... Okay, fine. So we won't have a current group. If we go to our interface, you'll see that nothing actually happens yet, and that's because we have to hook in... Well, we do see the message over here, but I think they'll disappear once we refresh the page. Yeah. That's because we don't have a current group. So what we want to do is when I click on one of these groups, I want it to set the current group in our group store. So if we go to our chat list component, chat list, so we say when I click on a chat item, at click, so let's just say on chat selected, let's create a function for on chat selected, it will get a chat, which is essentially the models.team. I'll just put that in here, chat. And it will say that the group store, let's get the group store, const group store is equal to use group store. So we're going to say the group store dot current group is equal to chat. And that should be everything hooked up in this section. What we're going to also want to do here in the future is get the messages for group. So we're just going to leave it in here as a to do. But if we go back to our view over here and we click it, so we see that we have that up and running, which is pretty cool. Which means that we're one step closer to creating our final product. So I think I'll call it at this one. In the next one, we also have a lot of things to do. We want to basically create the send functionality. We're going to want to set up the real time. We want to be able to create our message documents. There's a whole lot that we need to cover still. So I'm going to leave that for the next video. All right. See you in that one. We're getting really close to the end over here. So I'll see you there. All right. Bye-bye.